We said, if we accept that the first person who enters the room is a murderer, then whoever enters the room, whether he's a murderer or not, I mean, the conclusion just simply follows. The first premise could be wrong. It could be wrong that the first person who enters the room is the murderer. That statement itself could be wrong. But if we accept the truth of that statement, then we accept logically the truth of the second, that the one who enters the room is a murderer. It all depends on the first premises, right?
And you see, this is where I kind of see the presuppositional apologetics kind of working its way into this argument, although he never really explicitly says that. But it's like, if we presume that God exists, therefore these different attributes about God are perfectly explained, or these attributes about reality are perfectly explained on this assumption that God exists. And so he's kind of covering his tracks a little bit there by saying, oh, well, the first premise could be wrong. Like, we could be wrong that God doesn't exist. But in order to see how logical it all is, you have to assume that God exists. Therefore, God exists. I don't know. I don't understand why this would be convincing anybody. I feel like, starting in the middle of an argument and telling people not to worry about the arguments that establish the premises in the middle of the argument, I feel like you're just trying to put people in like sort of a tunnel vision-y kind of thing to hyper focus in on a certain part of the argument that works for him. It works for his argument, his rhetoric here, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't work at all.
So what that illustrates is that it's not a matter of showing something that we can see, or that we can hear, or we can smell, or we can touch. There are logical truths, and logical truths do not depend on what we actually see.
Well, there are logical truths, but whether or not those logical conclusions are reality, we would need some kind of empirical evidence, which is the thing that he tried to hand wave away. When he was talking about all of our senses and being able to detect or determine things using our senses, I feel like he's trying to hand wave away the evidentiary portion of the argument and solely focus in on, well, it's logically sound to say 2 + 2 = 4 here, so therefore I have at least $4. I feel like any reasonable person can definitely see how illogical that ends up being, because we haven't actually established that he has any money at all.
But coming back to the dollar example, yes, people still want to, verify this. Is there some kind of verification? So show me the $2, okay? So show me God then, people might be asking. But then the question is, what is your conception of God? If your conception of God is something that is visible to the human eye, then yes, the question is legitimate, show me God. But if our conception of God is something that is not visible to the human eye, then the question is unreasonable. And God tells us in the Quran, "La tudrikuhu al-absar wa huwa yudrikul absara wa huwa latiful khabir." Vision does not grasp him, but he grasps all vision, and he is subtle but aware. So God is something that is subtle. He is not grasped by human vision.
Okay, so the way that I understand God, and I could be totally wrong about this, obviously, feel free to correct me in the comments, but I feel like whether or not God is visible to the naked eye doesn't really matter. What the claim is that God has a real effect on our reality. God has performed certain miracles in our past. God has had some kind of role in shaping our world and shaping our history and intervening in this reality. So even if we cannot perceive God normally, we should still be able to detect God in some way. And the Quran obviously had enough time to figure out, oh, well, people have a problem with the fact that nobody can see God. Like, that's a pretty big problem for people. So they have this line in there. It's like, oh, well, he escapes vision. No vision can contain him. But, he sees you all the time. And he's all knowing and all this other stuff. So they've worked in this little catch-all statement for why you can't see God. Okay, good. We should still be able to detect him, though. Like, if he has a real effect on reality, like if he has some kind of measurable effect in our day-to-day lives or in reality in the past or currently, I feel like there should be some kind of empirical evidence that suggests that he is the only answer that makes sense. But what we find is that nature can explain most, if not all, things. At every single point in the past, when we thought God was responsible for something, we've come to find out that it was just some natural process that we didn't understand. Generally, the water cycle or lightning is a good example, a really simple example, because, a lot of times in our past, we've considered lightning to be an act of God or something controlled by God, at least. Dating all the way back to ancient Greece, we've thought that there was at least in some way a god controlling lightning. That even permeated through Christianity, through Judaism, through Christianity, because back in the Revolutionary War era, you had people that were very upset at Ben Franklin because he developed a lightning rod, which prevented people that were ringing church bells from being struck by lightning. And obviously, there were some people that got very upset with him because they thought that he was interrupting God's plan, like that he was intervening in God's, plan for humanity or something like that by diverting lightning from striking individuals. And the ancient Greeks, they thought that wherever lightning struck the ground was a holy place. And so, we now know that there's no God necessary for lightning to happen. And it's a totally natural event that happens. It's a natural phenomenon that occurs. And we know how to harness it, and we know how to divert it. We know, why it happens, how it happens. We know all of these things about it. But at one point in time, we thought that it was controlled by God. We, of course, now know better. But my point is that it seems like the evidence required to prove that God exists would need to be substantial, and it would also need to not be explained by nature, which is a high bar. I get that. I get that it's a high bar. And that's not me trying to place a high bar on the evidence. That's just how the evidence exists now. The evidence that exists now suggests that nature is the best explanation for any natural phenomena or any natural event or any event that happens in reality. It's the best explanation for it. So God has to be a better explanation than nature and just natural shit occurring. But it is the bar that God needs to get past. So that's God's fault. But again, he's trying to suggest that you should just sort of not even consider evidence because we can't visually see it. And the Quran says that we shouldn't be able to visually see it. But there are ways of detecting, natural phenomena that escape our own perception. Like our own limited way of perceiving this reality, we've been able to develop methods to be able to perceive those things that seem to be imperceptible to us. And if God is imperceptible to us, then we should still be able to detect him in some kind of way. We haven't, and I don't think that we ever will.